Words of Sri Aurobindo from the book Letters on Yoga, Part 1, from the Collective Works of Sri Aurobindo, Volume 28, page 64. The main topic is the Jivatman in the Integral Yoga. Subtopic: the Jivatman, spark soul and psychic being. Sri Aurobindo says, the Jivatman, spark soul and psychic being are three different forms of the same reality, and they must not be mixed up together, as that confuses the clearness of the inner experience. Sri Aurobindo says, the Jivatman or the spirit is self-existent, above the manifested or instrumental being. It is superior to birth and death, always the same. It is the individual self or Atman, the eternal true being of the individual. Sri Aurobindo says the soul is the spark of the divine in the heart of the living creatures of nature. It is not seated above the manifested being. It enters into the manifestation of the self, consents to be a part of its natural phenomenal becoming, supports its evolution in the world of material nature. It carries with it at first an undifferentiated power of divine consciousness, containing all possibilities, but at first unevolved possibilities, which have not yet taken form, but to which it is the function of evolution to give form. This spark of divinity is there in all terrestrial living beings, from the earth's highest to the lowest creatures. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, the psychic being is a spiritual personality put forward by the soul in its evolution. Its growth marks the stage which the spiritual evolution of the individual has reached and its immediate possibilities for the future. It stands behind the mental, the vital, the physical nature, grows by their experiences, carries the consciousness from life to life. It is the psychic person, Chaitya Purusha. At first, it is weaved by the mental, vital, and physical parts, limited by them in its self-expression, by their limitations, bound to the reactions of the nature. But as it grows, it becomes capable of coming forward and dominating the mind, life, and body. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, in the ordinary man, it still depends on them for expression and is not able to take them up and freely use them. The life of the being is animal and human, not divine. When the psychic being can, by sadhana, become dominant and freely use its instrument, then the impulse towards the divine becomes complete and the transformation of mind, vital, and body, not merely their liberation, becomes possible. Sri Aurobindo says, as the self or Atman is free and superior to birth and death, the experience of the Jivatman and its unity with the Supreme or Universal Self is sufficient to bring the sense of liberation, but for the transformation of the life and nature, the full awareness and awakening of a psychic being also is indispensable. The psychic being says, our Lord, the psychic being realizes at this stage its oneness with the true being, the self, but it does not disappear or change into it. It remains as its instrument for psychic and spiritual self-expression, a divine manifestation in nature. Our Lord Sri Aurobindo says, the Bindu seen by you above may be a symbolic way of seeing the Jivatman, the individual self as a drop of the sea, an individual portion of the universal divine. The aspiration on that level would naturally be for the opening of the higher consciousness, so that the being may dwell there and not in the ignorance. The Jivatman is already one with the divine in reality, but its spiritual demand may be for the rest of the consciousness also to realize it. The aspiration of the psychic being, says our Lord, the aspiration of the psychic being would then translate this demand entirely for the opening of the whole lower nature, mind, vital body to the divine, for the love and union with the divine, for its presence and power within the heart, for the transformation of the mind, life and body by the descent of the higher consciousness into this instrumental being and nature. Both aspirations are necessary for the fullness of this yoga. The demand of the self on the nature from above, the psychic aspiration of the nature from below. When the psychic imposes its aspiration on the mind, vital and body, then they too aspire, and this is what was felt by you as the aspiration from the level of the lower being. The aspiration felt above is that of the Jivatman for the higher consciousness with its realization of the one to manifest in all the being. Both aspirations help and are necessary to each other, but the seeking of the lower being is at first intermittent and oppressed by the obscurity and limitations of the ordinary consciousness. It has by sadhana to become clear, constant, strong and enduring. It then compels realization, makes it inevitable. Sri Aurobindo says, the sense of peace, purity, calm felt by you is brought about by a union or strong contact of the lower with the higher consciousness. It cannot be permanent at first, but it can become so by an increasing frequency and durability of the calm and peace, and finally by the full descent of the eternal peace and calm and silence of the higher consciousness into the lower nature. Next subtopic, the Jivatman in a supramental creation. Sri Aurobindo says, I have used the words Jiva and Jivatman in these and all the passages in exactly the same sense. It never occurred to me that there could be a difference. If I had so intended it, I would have drawn the distinction. The two words being similar very clearly, not left it to be gathered by inference. Sri Aurobindo says in the passage from the chapter in the Life Divine on the triple status of the supermind, I was describing how the supermind, working as a force of the highest self-determination of the divine, manifested it in three poises. And what was the consciousness of the Jivatman in a supramental creation? Sri Aurobindo continues to say, there is no statement that the place of the Jivatman is in the supramental plane alone. If that were so, man could have no knowledge of his individual self or spirit before he rose to the supramental plane. He could not have had any experience of the self, though he may have the sense of the dissolution of his ego in something universal. But he can become aware of his unborn, non-evolving self, a center of the divine consciousness long before that. The self, cosmic or individual, is experienced long before rising to the supermind. If it were not so, spiritual experience of that high kind would be impossible to mental man. Liberation would be impossible. He would first have to become a supramental being. As for the Purusha, it is there on all planes. There is a mental Purusha, Manomaya, leader of the life and body, as the Upanishad puts it, a vital, a physical Purusha. There is a psychic being or Chaitya Purusha which supports and carries all these as it were. One may say that these are projections of the Jivatman put there to uphold Prakriti on the various levels of the being. The Upanishad speaks also of a supramental and a bliss Purusha, and if the supramental and the bliss nature were organized in the evolution on earth, we would become aware of them, upholding the moments here. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, as for the psychic being, it enters into the evolution, enters into the body at birth, and goes out of it at death. But the Jivatman, as I know it, is unborn and eternal, although upholding the manifested personality from above. The psychic being can be described as the Jivatman entering into the bird, if you like, but if the distinction is not made, then the nature of the Atman is blood and a confusion arises. There is a necessary distinction for metaphysical knowledge and for something that is very important in spiritual experience. The word Atman, like spirit in English, is popularly used in all kinds of senses, but both for spiritual and philosophical knowledge, it is necessary to be clear and precise in one's use of terms so as to avoid confusion in thought and vision by confusion in the words we use to express them. Sri Aurobindo says, if I had meant that it is an individual consciousness that determines all this working as you tell me, then I should be in contradiction with my own teaching of the divine as the master of all and the need of surrender. For an individual who can do everything himself can carry out his own salvation. He has no need for surrender. These are the words of our Lord Sri Aurobindo.
Each atom of matter contains something of thy absolute. Thou art, thou livest, thou art radiant.